She laughed out loud in the middle of the courtroom, mocking her husband as she signed the divorce papers. To her it was a victory. She thought she was walking away with everything: freedom, money, even her new lover waiting in the back row. But she had no idea the man she was leaving behind wasn't broke at all. He had been building a secret empire in silence, and in just a few moments, her laughter would die in her throat. This is the story of how one woman laughed too soon. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment where you watching from. I still remember the way Los Angeles looked the first time Jessica and I walked down Hollywood Boulevard together. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in orange and pink, and she laughed at some street performer juggling fire. She squeezed my hand like I was the only man in the world. Back then, if you had told me that one day I'd be sitting in a courtroom across from her, watching her sign divorce papers with a smirk, I would have laughed in your face. I loved her too much to even imagine something like that. But life has a strange way of showing us the truth. My name is Michael Turner, and for most of my life, people saw me as nothing more than a small-time mechanic in East LA. I owned a modest garage, fixed cars, and lived a quiet life. To most people, I was the guy who always had grease on his hands, the man who worked late hours just to keep the lights on. That was the image I let people believe. Even Jessica, my own wife, believed it. Maybe I should say, especially Jessica. When we first met, I thought she was different. She was beautiful, no doubt about that, with long dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she carried herself, confident and bold. She worked as an assistant at a real estate office in downtown LA, and she made me feel like I mattered. I'll never forget the first time she came by my shop. I was bent over the hood of a rusty old Chevy, sweat dripping down my face when I heard her laugh. It was warm back then, not sharp like it would later become. She teased me about the grease on my cheek, and before I knew it, we were talking like we'd known each other for years. I thought I had struck gold. A girl like her, choosing me. A guy who smelled like motor oil and lived paycheck to paycheck. Felt like a dream. We dated for a year before I asked her to marry me. I didn't have much money, but I saved enough for a simple ring. She cried when I got down on one knee, and I thought those tears meant happiness. Maybe part of me still believes they did, at least in the beginning. For the first year or two, things were good. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We lived in a small apartment in East LA, close enough to the freeways that we'd hear the traffic at night. I'd come home tired and dirty, but Jessica would hug me anyway, saying she was proud of how hard I worked. She used to brag to her friends about my rough hands, saying they were proof I was a real man. But somewhere along the line something changed. I can't pinpoint the exact day or moment. Maybe it was little by little, like water dripping on stone until a crack appears. Jessica started noticing things we didn't have: nicer clothes, fancier restaurants, vacations her friends posted online. She'd scroll through Instagram at night, her eyes glued to pictures of couples smiling in Paris, New York, or Bali. She'd sigh and say, "One day, Michael. One day we'll have all this too." First, I believed her. I wanted those things too. Not the trips or the handbags, but the happiness I thought came with them. So I worked harder, took on more clients, stayed late at the garage. But no matter how much I did, it never seemed enough. Her laughter started to change. It wasn't warm anymore. It was sharp, mocking. She began comparing me to other men. Her friends' husbands who worked in finance or tech, who wore suits instead of work boots. She'd come home late, smelling of expensive perfume I couldn't afford, and when I asked about it, she'd brush me off with some excuse. I stayed quiet. Always quiet. That was my way. Not because I was weak, but because I learned early in life that silence can be more powerful than anger. My father once told me, "Michael, never waste your words on people who don't deserve them. Just listen. Let them think they're winning. One day, your silence will speak louder than anything you could say." So I let Jessica laugh. I let her sneer at my dirty clothes, let her roll her eyes when I couldn't afford a vacation, let her flaunt her new friends. It hurt, of course it did, but I stayed still. The truth is, by then, I already knew what she didn't. I wasn't just a mechanic. Yes, I fixed cars during the day, but when the garage closed, I lived another life entirely. I'll get to that later. For now, all you need to know is that I played my role perfectly. I let the world think I was broke. I let my wife believe she had married a man who would never rise above grease and dirt. Because the more she believed it, the sweeter the silence would be when the truth came out. But before that moment, there were years of small humiliations, and those memories still sting when I think about them. One night, Jessica insisted we go to a fancy steakhouse in Beverly Hills. She gave me barely 10 minutes' notice, so I showed up in my work boots, still smelling faintly of oil. She walked in next to me in a glittering red dress that made heads turn. I could feel eyes on us, and not in a good way. She ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and laughed loudly at the waiter's jokes. When I tried to make conversation, she sighed dramatically and whispered across the table, "Do you even realize how much of a joke you look tonight?" Her words burned, but I swallowed them. I kept eating my steak in silence. That's when her phone buzzed, lighting up under the table. I caught the reflection in her glass. A man's name. A name I didn't recognize. And her smile, the kind she hadn't given me in months, spread across her face as she typed back quickly. I knew what was happening. Anyone with eyes could see it. But again I stayed silent. She thought my silence meant weakness. She thought I was too blind, too poor, too desperate to hold on to her. But silence was my weapon. There's one memory that will never leave me. It wasn't the late nights or the perfume, or even the dinners where she mocked me. It was the day my little girl, Emma, climbed onto my lap while I was fixing something in the living room. She was only 7 at the time, innocent and sweet. She tugged at my shirt and whispered, "Daddy." Mommy kissed Uncle Mark in the car. My heart stopped. My chest tightened. But I didn't let her see my pain. I hugged her tightly and told her she never had to worry about it again. That night, I didn't confront Jessica. I didn't explode like she probably expected me to. Instead, I sat in my study until dawn, thinking, planning, preparing. That was the night I truly decided how this story would end. I knew then that one day, all her laughter, all her arrogance, would turn into silence. And I was willing to wait as long as it took. Most people thought I was just a simple mechanic in East LA. They saw the grease on my hands, the beat-up boots, the garage that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades, and they assumed that was all I was. Even Jessica, my wife, believed it. Maybe especially Jessica. But the truth is, every night when I closed the shop, washed the dirt off my hands and changed into a clean shirt, I stepped into a different life. A life nobody knew about. It all started with Carter Reynolds. Carter wasn't the type of man you'd expect to walk into a dusty garage on the edge of LA. He was in his mid-50s, wore tailored suits, and carried himself like someone who never had to worry about money. But one evening, just as I was locking up, I heard the cough of an old truck pulling into the lot. When I walked over, I saw Carter climbing out, his suit jacket hanging loosely on his shoulders. "Everyone else told me this thing's not worth fixing," he said, patting the hood of that rusted truck. I looked at it, then at him, and I could tell right away that this wasn't just about a truck. It was about respect. "Leave it with me," I said. "I'll take care of it." I stayed after hours that night, sweating under the dim lights of the shop, replacing parts, tightening bolts, cleaning things no one else would have bothered with. By the time the sun came up, that old truck ran smoother than it had in years. When Carter came back the next day, he raised his eyebrows as he turned the key and heard the engine purr. "How much?" he asked. I hesitated. Truth was, I could have charged him a fortune. But something in me said otherwise. "Just enough to cover the parts," I told him. "Trust is worth more than money." He stared at me for a long moment, then handed me the cash. But before he left, he said something that would change my life. "You've got something most men don't," Carter told me. "Patience, honesty, restraint. Those are rare. If you've got the guts to step into a different world, come see me." He handed me a card with nothing but an address on it. No name, no company, just an address. I almost threw it away. What business did a mechanic have in whatever world a man like him lived in? But curiosity got the better of me. A week later, after closing the shop, I drove across town to the address. It was a warehouse, looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls. I almost turned around. But when I typed in the code Carter had given me, the metal door slid open, and inside I stepped into another world. There were long glass tables, projectors throwing charts and graphs on the walls, men and women in suits talking about real estate, oil, tech startups. Deals worth more than my yearly income were being made in casual conversation, like they were trading baseball cards. And there, at the head of the table, sat Carter, puffing on a cigar. "You showed up," he said, smiling. "Good. Sit down and listen." That first night, I didn't understand half of what they were talking about. Stocks, investments, capital flows, seed funding. Sounded like another language. But I sat there, notebook in hand, writing down everything I could. I didn't say a word. Just listened. And that's how it started. Every night after work, I drove to that warehouse. First, I just listened. Then I asked questions. Then I started trying small investments, the kind of money I could risk without shaking Jessica's suspicions. 1,000 here, 500 there. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But Carter kept guiding me, introducing me to people, teaching me how the wealthy moved their money like water. Always flowing, always hidden. Years passed, and little by little, those small bets turned into big wins. I learned how to diversify, how to hide assets in trusts, how to let silence and patience build empires. Back home, nothing changed. I still wore the same boots, drove the same old truck, and kept the garage running. Jessica would laugh at me, roll her eyes when I came home tired, complain about the life we didn't have. She never once suspected the truth, that behind the curtain, I was building something bigger than she could ever imagine. I think about those nights sometimes. The smell of motor oil still on my hands, and then the shift to crisp white shirts, sitting across from billionaires while pretending I belonged. First I felt like a fraud. But then Carter told me something that became my compass. "Michael," he said one night, smoke curling around his head, "most men beg when they're broke. They flinch. Don't. That's power. Never let anyone know what you hold until the day you need to." I held on to those words. 'Cause back at home Jessica was changing. Her laughter turned cruel. She started comparing me openly to her friends' husbands, men who whisked their wives away to Cancun or Paris. I was still the same man she had once called strong and hardworking, but now she looked at me like I was a burden. She didn't know that the same man she mocked for having nothing was sitting on investments that were quietly multiplying. She didn't know that I had already made my decision years ago. She would never touch a cent of what I built. I let her believe I was broke. I let her sneer at my boots, my hands, my simple life. Because the louder her arrogance grew, the sweeter her silence would be when it shattered. There was one night in particular I'll never forget. Jessica had dragged me to another one of her fancy dinners, this time with a group of her friends in downtown LA. The restaurant had chandeliers bigger than my garage, and everyone at the table was dressed like they were auditioning for a movie. I sat there quietly, eating my food, while Jessica laughed at everyone's jokes and avoided even looking at me. When I excused myself to the restroom, I overheard her voice through the thin walls. She was talking to her lover. I didn't know his name yet, but I could hear the venom in her laugh. "He's pathetic," she said. "By the time this divorce is over, I'll be set for life. He has nothing to fight me with. Nothing." I remember staring at the mirror in that restroom, my reflection calm and steady. Her words didn't hurt me the way she thought they would. They hardened me. Because it wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was a bet. She was betting her future on my failure. And I was going to let her lose. From that night forward I doubled down. I shifted more assets, built stronger protections, set up trusts under names she'd never recognize. On paper, I looked like a man scraping by with a failing garage. But behind the curtain I was a fortress. At home she continued to laugh, continued to mock, continued to come home smelling like someone else's cologne. But every insult, every sneer, every laugh, those were just more fuel for me. Because I knew something she didn't. The day would come when silence would break. And when it did, her laughter would die. By the time the divorce papers were filed, I wasn't surprised. Jessica had been living like a stranger in our own home for months. She'd come back late, wearing clothes that smelled of cologne I didn't own. She spent hours on her phone, smiling at texts she wouldn't let me see. And when she looked at me, it wasn't with the warmth of a wife. It was with the disgust of someone who thought she was already gone. The truth is, I had already said goodbye to her long before the papers arrived. But what I wasn't prepared for, what cut deeper than her betrayal, was the way our daughter, Emily, got caught in the middle. Emily was only 13, old enough to notice the tension, young enough to still hope her parents could work it out. I tried to shield her from it, but children aren't blind. They feel things more than we think. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mom says you're too poor to take care of us. She says she's going to leave you for someone better." I felt something break inside me. Not because Jessica had said those words. I had heard worse from her. But because Emily, my little girl, was forced to carry them. I sat down on the edge of her bed and took her hand. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady, "don't you ever believe that money makes a person better? Do you hear me? The only thing that makes someone better is how they treat the people they love." She nodded, but the tears didn't stop. I kissed her forehead and stayed with her until she fell asleep. That night, I lay awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, and I made a promise to myself. This wasn't just about me anymore. Jessica had crossed the line from mocking me to poisoning our daughter's heart. And for that, she was going to face the truth. Not just of what I had built, but of who I truly was. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. By day, I still worked in the garage, fixing engines, changing oil, smiling at customers like nothing was wrong. By night, I sat at Carter's side, reviewing papers, signing documents, finalizing protections. I wasn't just hiding wealth anymore. I was preparing for battle. "Patience, Michael," Carter reminded me one evening as we pored over files in the warehouse. "She's already destroying herself. You don't need to lift a hand. Just wait for the right moment." And he was right. Jessica didn't realize she was writing her own downfall with every arrogant step she took. One Friday evening I came home earlier than usual. Jessica wasn't there, but her car was parked outside. I heard laughter from the living room, a deep male voice mixed with hers. My chest tightened, but I didn't walk in. Instead, I stayed quiet at the door, listening. "I told you," Jessica laughed. "Once the divorce is final, I'll take everything he has. He's too dumb to fight me. Then it's you and me, baby. We'll have the life we deserve." Her lover chuckled, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You really think he's that clueless?" "Of course," Jessica replied. "He's just a mechanic. He barely understands bills, let alone money. I'll be rich by the time this is over." I walked away without making a sound. My hands shook, not with anger but with resolve. I knew then that the breaking point wasn't her betrayal. It was her certainty. She was convinced she had already won. And nothing, I realized, would hurt her more than discovering she had laughed too soon. When the first court date finally came, Jessica walked in like she was stepping onto a runway. Her hair perfect, her heels clicking across the polished floor, her smile smug. Her lover sat in the back, arms folded, watching her like he was proud of his prize. I, on the other hand, wore my usual clothes. Plain shirt, worn boots, nothing fancy. I kept my head down, as though I was the one defeated. I let her think she was winning. As the judge began reviewing the case, Jessica leaned back in her chair and smirked at me. "Don't worry, Michael," she whispered. "You'll be free soon. Free from me and free from the little you have left." I didn't answer. I just stared ahead, my heart steady. The lawyers talked. Papers were shuffled. Numbers were thrown around. Jessica's lawyer painted me as a failure, a broke mechanic with nothing to offer. Jessica laughed under her breath, clearly enjoying every second. But then, slowly, the tide began to turn. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through another stack of documents. His voice shifted from casual to serious. "Mr. Turner," he said, glancing at me, "it appears that your financial records are extensive." Jessica frowned. "What do you mean extensive?" she asked, her voice sharp. The judge cleared his throat. "According to these records, Mr. Turner has significant investments, trusts, and holdings. In fact, as of the last valuation, his net worth stands at—" He paused, scanning the paper again. $87 million. The room went silent. I didn't look at Jessica right away. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her shock from across the table. Her smirk was gone, replaced by wide eyes and trembling lips. She turned toward me as if seeing me for the first time. "Wow, what? That's not possible," she stammered. "He's broke. He's just a mechanic." The judge raised an eyebrow. "It seems, Mrs. Turner, that appearances can be deceiving." Her lover shifted uncomfortably in the back, suddenly less proud, suddenly less certain. He leaned forward, studying me like he didn't know what to make of it. I finally turned to Jessica. Calm, steady, and silent. She shook her head, her voice breaking. You hid this from me." I didn't answer. Not yet. I let the silence fill the space between us, heavy and suffocating. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. The breaking point wasn't her betrayal. It wasn't even the divorce. The breaking point was right here, watching her realize that the man she mocked, the man she laughed at, the man she thought was nothing, was everything she could never have. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt with her in a long time. The courthouse that morning was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in the way everything felt stiff, heavy, unforgiving. The marble floors echoed every step like they were reminding us that whatever happened inside those walls would carry weight far beyond the room. I sat quietly at my table, my hands folded, my head slightly bowed. Not because I was weak or afraid, but because I wanted Jessica to keep believing her own lie, that I was beaten, that I was nothing. Jessica, on the other hand, sat across from me like a queen ready to be crowned. She wore a red dress that looked more suited for a gala than a courtroom. Her lips were painted, her hair styled perfectly. Every move she made screamed confidence. She didn't look at me with sadness or even anger. She looked at me like I was beneath her. Her lover sat in the back row, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted me to see him. He wanted me to know he was the man she had chosen. But the thing about arrogance is that it blinds you. Jessica thought she had already won. And that's why she laughed. As the judge shuffled through the opening paperwork, her lawyer made their case. They painted a picture of me as a struggling mechanic, a man with barely enough money to cover rent and groceries, let alone fight a divorce. They described Jessica as a woman who had sacrificed her youth for a man who gave her nothing. They argued she was entitled to everything I had, what little they believed there was. And through it all, Jessica smiled. She even let out a soft laugh, the kind you give when you're certain the game is rigged in your favor. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even blink. When my lawyer stood to speak, he kept his tone simple, respectful. "Your Honor," he said, "we ask that you review all of Mr. Turner's financial records before any decision is made. We believe the court will find that appearances do not reflect reality." Jessica snorted under her breath. "Good luck with that," she muttered loud enough for me to hear. The judge nodded and began flipping through the thick folder of documents my lawyer had submitted. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. Jessica crossed her legs, leaned back, and smirked like she was waiting for the punchline of a bad joke. Then the judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice firm but calm, "it seems you have been under the impression that your husband has little to no assets." "Exactly," Jessica said quickly. "That's why I'm entitled to what's left. He can't support me. He can't even support himself." The judge looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "That is not accurate." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." The judge tapped the papers in front of him. According to these verified documents, Mr. Turner has investments, trusts, and holdings that have been built and managed over the course of many years. His current net worth is estimated at $87 million. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a moment no one moved. Even the air seemed to freeze. Jessica's mouth fell open, her painted lips trembling as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. She blinked rapidly, as if she could force the judge to take it back, as if she had misheard. Her lover in the back sat up straighter, his arms unfolding, his eyes darting between Jessica and me. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't leaning back, confident and secure. He was shifting uncomfortably, his face pale. Jessica finally found her voice. That can't be true. He's a mechanic. He doesn't have that kind of money. The judge raised an eyebrow. Appearances, he said simply, are often deceiving. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering furiously, but Jessica wasn't listening. She turned to me instead, her eyes wide, her voice breaking. Michael, you hid this from me? All these years. I met her gaze for the first time that morning. My face calm, my voice steady. I didn't hide it, Jessica, I said quietly. I just never needed to prove it to you. Until now. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. But you let me believe you were broke. You let me laugh at you. You let me. Yes, I interrupted softly. I let you. She stared at me like the ground beneath her had given way. And then, for the first time in years, I saw silence fall over her. The laughter, the arrogance, the cruel smirks, they were gone. Replaced by a hollow emptiness. The look of someone who realized the game was never in her favor to begin with. Her lover stood up suddenly, adjusting his jacket like he couldn't get out of the courtroom fast enough. He didn't even look back at her. One moment, he was the man she had chosen over me. The next, he was gone, disappearing out the door as if he had never been there at all. Jessica turned, her voice desperate. Wait, she called after him. Don't leave me. But the door closed behind him. She collapsed back into her chair, her face pale, her hands shaking. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. The judge cleared his throat again, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. Given these findings, the court sees no reason to award Mrs. Turner the assets she is demanding. In fact, her conduct during these proceedings will be taken into account moving forward. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me as though begging for mercy, but I felt none. I leaned slightly closer, my voice so quiet only she could hear. You laughed too soon. Her lips quivered, and then the tears spilled over. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But I didn't reach out to comfort her. I didn't offer her a handkerchief or a word of consolation. Because this moment wasn't about cruelty. It was about truth. For years she had mocked me, betrayed me, dismissed me. And now, she was facing the reality she had never prepared for. I stood as the judge finalized the papers. My lawyer gathered our things. The weight that had pressed on me for so long, the laughter, the betrayal, the humiliation, lifted as I walked toward the door. Behind me, Jessica's cries echoed in the courtroom. But I didn't look back. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one trapped. I was free. When I stepped out of that courthouse, the Los Angeles sun hit me like a warm blessing. For years, I had carried the weight of her laughter, the sting of her betrayal, and the ache of silence. But as those heavy wooden doors closed behind me, it felt like chains falling off. I paused on the steps, breathing in the crisp air. People passed by, some hurrying to their own hearings, some walking with lawyers at their sides, others just going about their lives. None of them knew what had just happened inside. None of them knew how one man's silence had turned into strength, or how one woman's arrogance had crumbled into ashes. And I didn't need them to know. This wasn't about proving myself to the world. It was about finally proving something to myself. That patience had been worth it, that restraint had meaning, that staying quiet in the face of mockery wasn't weakness but power. That night when I got home, Emily was waiting. She ran up to me as soon as I walked through the door, her arms wrapping tight around my waist. "Daddy," she whispered. "Did it go okay?" I held her close, smoothing her hair. "It went just fine, sweetheart. We're gonna be okay now. Better than okay." She pulled back and looked up at me, her eyes wide and hopeful. "Really? Really?" I said with a smile. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just saying it to comfort her. I believed it. We sat on the couch together, just the two of us. No shouting, no bitterness, no cruel laughter echoing through the walls. The silence of the house was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I thought about Jessica then. I wondered what she was doing, where she was sitting, what thoughts were running through her mind. I imagined her in that red dress, makeup smeared by tears, staring at the empty seat where her lover had once been. She had laughed too soon. And now, she was left with nothing but silence. In the weeks that followed, the divorce was finalized. Jessica tried to appeal, tried to claw back some piece of what she thought she was owed. But every attempt fell flat. The truth was undeniable. She had walked away from the man she mocked as worthless, only to discover too late that he had been the strongest card in the deck. Her lover was gone. The friends who once admired her confidence now avoided her, whispers trailing her like shadows. And me. I moved forward, not with arrogance or triumph, but with quiet peace. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't flaunt my wealth. I didn't suddenly change who I was. I still drove my old truck. I still wore my worn boots. I still worked in the garage because fixing engines wasn't just a job, it was part of who I was. But I also started spending more time with Emily. We traveled together, small trips at first, then bigger ones. Disneyland, the Grand Canyon, San Francisco. Her laughter filled the car on every road trip, and each time I heard it, I thanked God that her smile hadn't been stolen by bitterness. She didn't need to know all the details of what had happened. She just needed to know that her father would always be there, steady and strong, no matter what storms came. And that was enough. One evening, Carter and I sat together again, this time not in the warehouse but at a quiet restaurant overlooking the LA skyline. He raised his glass toward me, his eyes glinting with pride. "You handled it better than most men ever could," he said. "You didn't chase revenge. You didn't break under the weight of betrayal. You stayed patient. That's rare." I nodded, swirling the drink in my glass. "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "There were nights I wanted to scream, nights I wanted to throw it all in her face. But silence had its own power." Carter smiled. "And she learned that lesson the hard way." I thought about Jessica then. Not with anger, not with gloating, but with a strange kind of sadness. Once upon a time I had loved her. Once upon a time we had dreams together. But somewhere along the way, she had traded love for greed, respect for arrogance, loyalty for betrayal. And in doing so, she had lost everything. If you're listening to me tell this story right now, maybe you're wondering what the lesson is. Maybe you're waiting for some grand piece of wisdom to tie it all together. The truth is simple. Don't underestimate the quiet ones. The world teaches us to shout, to prove ourselves, to fight back at every insult. But sometimes the greatest strength lies in patience, in letting people reveal themselves, in waiting for the right moment to speak, not with noise but with truth. Jessica thought she had broken me. She thought I was a man with nothing. She laughed at me, mocked me, betrayed me. But I didn't need to fight her with words. I didn't need to match her cruelty with anger. I just needed to wait. Because arrogance always laughs too soon. And when the truth finally comes, silence speaks louder than anything else. The last time I saw Jessica was months later. I was walking down a street in downtown LA with Emily, ice cream cones in our hands, when I noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench. Her clothes weren't glamorous anymore. Her hair wasn't styled. She looked tired, older than her years. It was Jessica. She looked up and our eyes met. For a moment it felt like time froze. Emily squeezed my hand, not realizing who the woman was. Jessica opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Her lips trembled, Her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and disbelief. I gave her a small nod, not of forgiveness, not of pity, but of closure. Then I turned and walked on with my daughter, her laughter ringing out beside me. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to rub salt in the wound. The silence between us said everything. And as we walked into the golden light of the setting sun, I knew this chapter of my life was over. I was free. Emily was safe. And Jessica, she would never forget the day she laughed too soon.